Yeah, that's how we've done it the past couple times. So, and I got, mixed feedback from the computer. I think the main thing is, I was interacting with folks in the group and not doing a good job of repeating back to the screen. But that's all right. Hey there, folks. We'll take just a minute or two, see if anybody drops in. Excuse me. Got one gentleman up here live in person who was one of our regulars at the gardening classes up here before we went to streaming them online from having them in person. So trying to build that back up. I know today's topic is a little more obscure, ambiguous, so we'll see if anybody tunes in. I don't have anybody yet, so my buddy Chuck and I might just chat a little bit while we're waiting. So, but I didn't expect a ton of people to show up. Last year it was kind of a slow, mellow one. And yeah, it's kind of an abstract topic. That's kind of why I do it this time of year. Things are slowing down, but
I wasn't sure with the COVID and everything, still getting people or not.
Well, we weren't for a while, but then we've started promoting again a bit more. And so, yeah, we had a decent group last month for the compost class, and then a decent group for the garlic class, the one prior. So, yeah, pick them back up. So, we'll see how finishing up the schedule for next year.
Did the garlic guy come up?
He didn't. I actually did it solo this year. He had some health stuff going on. Was recovering from surgery or something, and so I did it my first time solo. So I think I did all right. I know I missed some of the details that he gets into.
I was kind of sorry I missed it because I was hoping maybe to buy some garlic, but
and he
got some at the store.
Gotcha. Yeah, he didn't have much or really any available for sale anyway. So I ordered mine per usual, which I end up having to pre-order it, I think in June.
Oh, really?
Yeah, May or June, will start selling out. So got to pre-order early, but I've got almost those entire, both of those, almost the entire 48 feet in garlic. So probably about 40. It hasn't quite peaked up yet, but hopefully will. So, all right. Well, Facebook land, I don't know if anybody's going to drop in, but I will try and keep talking to the camera, and we'll kind of dive into it. So today's topic is talking about soil erosion and really focusing on the benefits of preventing soil erosion, some of the problems that we can solve by minimizing erosion, and really the benefits of building healthy soil with lots of organic matter, because that's really the ticket to it all, is that organic matter and humus, which is the most basic part of soil. Once it's broken down, the water holding capacity of organic matter and that humus is astronomical. I don't have. I'll pull up the statistic before the end of this. I don't have it in front of me now, but the water holding capacity of just a 1% increase in soil organic matter, on an acre, is tens of thousands of gallons of water. So if we can boost the organic matter content in our soils just a bit, that prevents a huge amount of runoff, which ultimately leads to erosion, right? So that's kind of the ticket as far as preventing erosion passively without doing anything active, is really just building soil. And part of the reason I think that's most important in our area is because our soils often catch a bad rap for not being high quality, but that's really not the case. They're high desert, a special type of soil, and really the main thing is that it's low in organic matter. that's part of what leads to the alkalinity, which, is the resistance of the soil's pH to go down and acidify. But if we remedy that, then we're not only going to turn our, what folks consider mediocre soil into great soil for growing plants, but we're also increasing that water holding capacity by a major amount, which is important for us considering that we receive most of our moisture from the sky in the wintertime as snow. So the more that we can hold on to that through the growing season, and then we do get growing season rainfall events, they're often, quick and hard, and we get the flash flooding because we've got a hydrophobic soil that's all dried out, like a dry sponge, doesn't want to absorb the water right away, and so then it's going to run off, and that's going to erode and move the soil typically to places we don't want. On the big scale, the primary causes of soil erosion, conventional agriculture is a standout. Tillage-based agriculture, chemical-based agriculture, both of those things. Now, chemical is not the best term to use, but synthetic chemical agriculture, right? Because using synthetic chemicals often is going to negatively impact the soil microbiology. Same thing with tillage. You're going to destroy that soil structure. You destroy or disturb the microbes in the soil. Takes them time to rebound, and during that time that they're rebounding, that's when soil is most vulnerable to be eroded. One of the most compacting factors in conventional agriculture is rainfall on soil, on bare soil that's recently been tilled. So another one, leaving agricultural fields fallow in the off season, not cover cropping, not keeping living roots in the soil, particularly in our area when we do get our winter precipitation, that causes massive runoff. And that's something that is common in other parts of the country as well. One of probably the best documented cases of mass runoff and erosion from conventional agriculture is the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that comes out of the Mississippi River. It's not all soil erosion. Some of it is excess fertilizers and excess nitrogen getting into the waterways. But what ultimately happens is soil and nutrition of one sort or another gets into our waterways, and that causes big algal blooms, which those can have their own problems in the ecosystem. But one of the main chain reactions that happens with a massive algal bloom is that the algae consumes all of the nutrition and all of the oxygen in that area while it's growing and blooming. And once it does that, it depletes its resources, then it dies, and that decomposition of the algae, that consumes a whole bunch more oxygen. So then you get this toxic, low oxygen area in the Gulf of Mexico, which I think is a couple thousand square miles, where, some remarkably large portion of the Gulf that's just totally dead and can't support life. And it's all due to soil and agricultural erosion. Poor grazing management, so plant-based agriculture leads to the same things. Deforestation. We're doing a lot of that as humans, and then of course, again, locally, we know that that's going on this season with all our big fires. We get those burn scars, and after the fire moves through, a lot of that plant life's destroyed, the roots aren't holding the soil anymore, and so it's free to move once it gets hit with water. Floods, other natural disasters, that's the natural side of things. That's going to happen. We certainly can mitigate some of that with earthworks and whatnot, but still, one of the biggest things we can do is, at scale, wherever possible, build topsoil. and build high quality soil, because that's going to absorb and hold that water and prevent it from moving. So the primary impacts, primary negative impacts of that erosion, aside from causing negative impacts downstream in the waterway, obviously we're going to lose fertility. Our topsoil, that's where the nutrition for our plants or our landscapes are. So if we erode that, we're going to lose some of our fertility. Again, we're losing our water holding capacity. And so none of that is good. And ultimately, we want to prevent that wherever possible. So some key concepts for slowing erosion. We want infiltration instead of movement. So if anybody's familiar with contour farming, it's the old name for an old style of farming that now people are doing under other names thinking it's new, kind of thing. Contour farming. Contour farming. So, it's basically,
Terraces.
Yeah, terraces, and even, in, conventional tractor or tillage-based agriculture, a landscape or, a piece of agricultural land will benefit greatly from tilling, planting, driving, doing all of these things on your natural contour line, even if it's relatively flat, as opposed to just doing straight lines, straight rows that are off contour. Because what that's going to allow to happen is when you're doing things on contour, instead of the water flowing, it's going to fill and infiltrate and do that, more slowly. So terraces are another great example, or just berms and swales, which, that's fancy words for ditch and mound. But doing those things on contour prevents the flow of water and allows it to infiltrate slowly. So planning those kinds of earthworks into the designs of our landscapes, particularly when we're planting things, not only going to reduce the water needs and water requirements of whatever we're growing, also going to reduce that erosion. Any erosion that's happening uphill or upstream, we're going to stall it, catch it. We can actually catch some of that fertility. And this can have a place in some of our broadacre agriculture where we are, graded, leveled, and set up for irrigation flooding. Because what can be done is, with proper planning and organic materials, you can place catches, and it's something that was done in flood style agriculture many years ago, is that catchments, almost like wattles, the straw bats that we see placed on hillsides, some of the dryland agriculturists used to build essentially big wattles out of brush in their floodplains or areas that they knew, they'd be flooding with canals from rivers, and it would catch sediment, topsoil, and kind of hold that fertility in the field where they're going to be growing it out. So, especially if you're on, a sloped property, there's lots of potential for doing things like that, combining with berm and swale, again, to catch and slow that water so that we get infiltration along the way. For us here in northern Nevada, there's definitely some good plants that can be used to hold the soil. Probably the best thing, next to increased organic matter content and building topsoil, next best thing for preventing erosion is having living roots in the ground. So, I'm a big advocate of using mulch all over the place. Living mulch is the best if we can pull it off. So if you can have living roots in the ground as opposed to a dead organic mulch, that's going to do an even better job of holding the soil, and that will actually be building soil from below ground and above ground. Because what happens, the natural cycle of that plant, whether it's mowed, browsed on by animals, or going through its natural seasonal cycle, perennials, when they do die back or get grazed, they will slough off or release some of their little fine feeder root hairs because they can't support them anymore. And so when that happens, that breaks down, and that's creating the soil, building soil from below. And then you've got whatever detritus or debris coming off the top, or getting ingested by animals, returned as manure. And so you're building soil from the top that way, as opposed to just putting down organic matter on top and only building from the top. So ideally, we'd have a living mulch in place wherever possible, or in areas that are particularly prone or vulnerable to erosion, cut channels that are being created on slopes. That's a great one. That's a great spot to be utilizing our perennial bunching grasses. Prairie grasses and typically herbaceous herb layer perennials are often going to have deeper and more fibrous roots than trees. Trees' roots often go out far further laterally than they go deep. So those perennial bunching grasses, for us in our area, top candidates are Great Basin wild rye, tufted hairgrass, Idaho fescue, and there's several other Great Basin natives. And they're pretty. They look great in the landscape. They're not dissimilar to some of the really popular bunching grasses that our landscaping companies use. I've got a couple out front here that are non-native that were used, by the landscaping contractor. And although they're smaller, they're not any less aesthetically pleasing than the native ones I have on the other side, that we can go take a look at. They take a little longer to establish, but they also serve a whole bunch of other benefits. And so again, sticking with that, smaller herb level or herb layer plants having deeper, more fibrous roots, better for holding soil in most cases. Our perennial wildflowers are also great candidates for lots of that. And we've got some regional Great Basin natives that aren't necessarily native to right here in northern Nevada, but they're still good candidates and not a bad decision to be incorporating. Some of my favorites that we use up here and that spread easily on their own are native blue flax, black-eyed Susan, Gaillardia, which is also known as Indian blanket flower. Echinacea is a great one. We have a native annual sunflower as well as a perennial sunflower. Mexican hat, I don't know the genus species on, it spreads well. And then clary sage is another one that I've become a big fan of, which that one may not be a proper even regional native, but a great appropriate plant for our climate that spreads really well on its own, great for the pollinators. There's several varieties of penstemon, Palmer's and Rocky Mountain being the standout, that are Great Basin appropriate, spread well on their own. So we've got lots of good options. And again, here on the site, we're mostly spreading lots of those everywhere, but the bunching grasses in particular, trying to use mostly on the top of slopes, the crest of slopes, and again, wherever possible, putting them on contour, so that they're going to naturally catch water and debris and runoff as it moves across the slope, and catch it on contour so that it's going to infiltrate rather than flow. So that's kind of the basic concept with using some of those. And in permaculture, which I mentioned the permaculture principles and ethics fairly often, we try and follow those to the best of our ability up here. Berms and swales are really popular in permaculture. Again, fancy terminology for ditch and mound. Berm typically being uncompacted. Usually the only place you'd have a berm compacted on the landscape is where you'd be placing a spillway, which is in the event that your swale or your ditch is deep enough to actually fill with some water in a high rainfall event. You'd have a compacted spillway to move to the next terrace or tier down into the next swale. And you'd have that compacted so that it would not erode as water moves across it. If you have uncompacted, it's ultimately going to cut a channel and not fill up anymore. So it's a very common practice to make your berm and swale on contour, and as you're digging out the swale, that's the material that makes up your berm. And then typically perennials will be planted along the berm, the top and along the slope, and then often annual or herb layer, smaller than tree and shrub style plants would be actually planted in the swale, assuming they tolerate whatever wet conditions that may produce. Again, in our area, we could expect that to only be wet during winter time, and even if it was to fill up with a decent amount of water throughout the growing season, we could expect it to dry out. So it would be appropriate for a lot of vegetable crops still. So, and that's a great way, if you've got a property that's on a slope, and you may see, when we have rainfall event, you may see channels cut, you may see muddy water leaving some low spot on the property, draining out, and incorporating a few techniques like this, living and dead mulches, doing some earthworks on contour, planting specific things along that path of flow to slow it down, you may see either that you no longer have runoff leaving the property in those rainfall events, or you have a greatly reduced amount, and you may see that it has no sediment and may be cleared because it's moving slowly enough and it's depositing any silt, sediment, or debris along the way. So we've got a couple cool spots where that works up here on site, and we just, I don't know, what are we, 6 or 8 weeks? We got here in Carson City, we got between 3 and 6 inches of rain. You got 4?
Yep.
Yeah, I got close to that 6 inches up here. I didn't have my proper rain gauge up, but the wheelbarrow and some buckets, very close to that 6 inch. We were close to that top end, and so I had some substantial flow moving down, and it gets arrested on the lower portion of the property where I have a bunch of beds that almost cut contour. That right behind you, they don't quite cut contour, but it funnels down to there, and so I see the area for opportunity higher in the site up here to do a couple proper berm swale. Which, if you're hikers or trail people, you might be familiar with water bars. Or you see them on Forest Service roads and whatnot. It's basically small ditch, usually slightly off contour, but often you put logs in it, so it'll channel the water. But then you've got some woody debris in there that prevent it from just totally carving out, and that'll direct flow of water, across trail or across road. Intentionally, without allowing it to do its own thing. So cutting in a couple, very similar to the berm swale kind of concept. Putting woody debris in the bottom, great way to go about it. But that's my plan for our little steep section, is just cutting small trends, plugging it with some logs and sticks, and then ultimately planting it in hopes that any surface water moving across will stop in there, soak up, and not fill enough to actually make its way out. Hopefully holding enough moisture that it'll grow some plants without any irrigation or minimal assistance. So kind of the goal. And I'm gonna look for that statistic with the water holding capacity, and see if I can pull that up. You guys have any thoughts or questions? Or did you have any expectations coming into talk today that I can hit? I don't have a ton of material.
I would suggest building soil for the garden at home.
So in the garden, yeah, we can talk about some of that. Did you catch the composting class?
Yep.
Okay, I thought so. I thought you were up there. Nice, excellent.
4.5 are full, ready to use.
Excellent. Good. Looking good. Happy with the quality?
Oh yeah, I got worms in there. 2 of them I keep covered with a plastic sheet.
Okay.
And wood on top. That way it keeps the bugs out.
Right.
It keeps the moisture in. It keeps it from drying up from the wind. And now you can put your hand in there and squeeze it. It's nice. It'll stay like the rest of the wall.
Right.
It's not. You won't squeeze water out.
Right. Perfect. Yeah, that's the fist test.
I was able to harvest for my neighbor. He cleaned up a small yard with a mower, put everything in a green bin. So I took that and distributed it in each bin.
Right.
Each my bin, so each one got a layer of this much of brown in there.
Oh, great. Love it.
It worked out pretty good.
Yeah. So I mean that material, especially that that finished material that's got that real nice texture, that holds its shape a bit. That's that. And yeah, you can't quite squeeze water out unless you oversaturate it.
Yeah, it's real fine.
Yeah, that's high humus content, and humus is that stuff with that water holding capacity. It's like the base. What's the word I'm looking for? The base constituent of organic matter in the soil once it's all broken down, and yeah, and that's what it is. 18 to 20 times its weight in water. And I think this is the 1 inch, or 1%, 27,000 gallons of water per acre. A 1% increase in organic matter in your soil. And so to put that in perspective, our native soils, I think, are typically between 0.5% and 1.5% organic matter, and a typical good quality garden soil is 5 to 7%. So we're way under, and good quality garden soils can go as high as 11, 12, 13% before they start running into, there's some negative issues once they get that high in organic. What's that?
It gets too mucky.
Yeah, and it may be that I can't remember. There's a farm in Oregon or Washington. It's called Singing Frogs Farm. They're one of my absolute favorites as far as like a bio-intensive, compost first, kind of no-till farming style, and they have some incredible statistics that they've documented over the first 5 or 10 years. I think they're 11 or 12 seasons in now, but going from a couple percent organic matter, and they've gotten to the point where they can't add compost to areas because they're getting that 12-13%. Granted, they're a much less brittle climate. Their moisture is much more consistent. It's arguably a much easier place to accomplish that. They still do an incredible job. They're worth checking out some of their methodology. But we get that kind of water holding capacity from just a 1% increase. So you can think, if we can take some of our native soils and just boost them a couple percent, that's a huge amount. That's holding all of the water that falls from our sky. We literally have the potential to store it all in the ground and have zero runoff. At what scale we can accomplish that?
Who knows? Homeowners do that at home. If you have 10,000 homes, you got a base.
Absolutely, and that's a huge point as homeowners. If we can start doing this in our lawns.
They have success growing carrots, radishes. They're happy when they do it next year. Right on soil.
Right. Absolutely. And, I'm not a fan of lawns, but this absolutely applies to lawns too. Shifting from the chemical management to a compost forward style of turf management, that's what you're going to do. I mean, holy smokes, you can water your lawn less. It's a no-brainer, right? So, some of this stuff, we just have to put it in practice. Some of it is happening. I think UNR has switched all of their turf, at least non-athletic Well, yeah, because they're I think they're synthetic turf on their athletic fields, but all of their campus, they've switched as they're working with full circle compost. I think they're 100% chemical free. I think they only use compost for their fertility management with that up there. They get a special blend that's suited for their properties, but people have done that at home too. It's like I think they say a 1/4 inch of good quality compost every season, and no weed and feed, none of the synthetic garbage, lower maintenance, less watering, better results. So, yeah, cheaper, 100%, and it's better for everybody. Something we'll talk about in the spring. We'll do one of these and talk specifically about the chemical-free landscape, and just go deep into why that's important. And one of the key topics there is kids and pets. Especially when we talk about lawns, whether it's in the front yard or at the park. That's a huge, like the main user of those spaces. Kids, pets, and we want that to be non-toxic. So we certainly don't want to see nasty stuff leaving when we do have rainfall events, or melt-off events. So. As far as the building soil goes, I mean, the composting is really the ticket. So, utilizing that organic matter, like you mentioned, not letting it go in the bins and end up in waste management. That's the ticket. And then, at some point spreading that. Some of that can be done without the composting process, just organic matter in place, leave it to break down. But it's not as efficient. It's just easier and less labor intensive. But as far as the nutrient cycling goes, you lose a lot to the atmosphere, stuff gets blown away. It's much slower, but it does serve its purpose in a lot of places. Mulching mowers, and just, leaving that chopped up in the yard. Little leaf mulcher instead of raking and bagging. Mulch it, shred it fine, spread it back out. Otherwise, compost it. Hot piles are great. Static worm piles are great. Sometimes I end up with kind of a hybrid of the two, depending how hot the pile gets. Sometimes might miss the mix a little bit. It's not going to eat up totally properly. Ends up being kind of a big worm pile, which is all right depending on what's in it. As long as there's no weed seeds that needed to be cooked out. Or anything potentially pathogen rich, like manures, or things like that. We use a lot of juice pulp from the juice shop. Sometimes if we don't use it very quickly, it gets gross pretty fast. So there's gross stuff going in. Anything that got like really funky, maggoty, stinky, you want to cook that and get that up to temp ideally, but some of that's just a factor of time as well. You're gonna, if you let it sit and it's assuming it's been aerated and not gone anaerobic, time is the solution for that. So and then wherever possible, like I said, I'm an advocate of dead mulch, dry mulches. But wherever possible, living mulch is the ticket. So, if we can figure out, the clover or the blue flax, creeping thyme, maybe some things that don't need as much water as grass and clover, and we can get them established and still just kind of mow them, chop them back. Wherever we can, that's ideal. And that gets easier. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling cycle to some degree because we get that water holding,
Plants. That's how with Teresa. She had a garden. She planted native flowers every year, a different set with. She bought pack seed. Native plant seed, put it out there. And some of them germinate after 1 year, others after 2 years, others after 3.
Right.
But every year you have different types of flowers, and the soil that can be really rich because the roots go far down your fibrous roots.
Right.
And so you pull plants out and chip off the soil.
Right. Yeah.
It was really nice.
Yeah, and that's
So if you can encourage all the homeowners to say, okay, saying zero escape or zero lawn, say, how about these native flowers?
Mhm.
It's more appealing.
Yep.
You do that and say, 1/3 of your lawn, look at used to them. Well, I don't need this lawn.
right. Exactly. So mention that with some of our native flowers, his wife had planted a big mix, and they got to watch the natural succession of some species germinating that first season, and then some germinating those subsequent years, and how being uh, native wildflowers, they had lots of dense fibrous roots. Turn the soil changed kind of on its own just through that plant activity, and yeah, that's a wonderful thing to see. And part of that has to do with minimizing the disturbance too. And that succession, a lot of that's based in the soil, and it changes based on the ratio of bacteria to fungi in the soil. And disturbed soils, tilled soils, for example, are going to be more bacterially dominated. And that's where we get our early successional plants, which is often all our weeds. And then as you move through and get more fungi in the soil, you're going to start to see the change, and you start trending towards more perennials, ultimately towards shrubs and trees. You know, the soil kind of wants to naturally succeed and move towards forests wherever there's enough moisture. We don't have enough moisture, so it kind of doesn't happen, although, I don't know, what do you think it looked like right here before they clear-cut the basin? I bet it was Jeffrey and Ponderosa cruising all the way down, but it may take hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years for that to, happen again on its own without our intervention, because we're in such a brittle climate. And brittleness is an actual term for climate regions, and what it means is it doesn't have to do with the quantity of moisture, but it's the consistency of moisture throughout the season. So East Coast, Mid-Atlantic states, a lot of coastal areas, very, very non-brittle climates. Even moisture quantities can be drastically different. It's consistent. You can rely on it throughout the year. True four-season places. We and most deserts and arid places are very, very brittle climates, and that moisture can be very inconsistent year to year, and obviously through multi-year cycles as well. And so that has to do with how ecological succession trends in those areas. The Northeast has been clear-cut as well. Similar timelines, how it grows back, 40, 50 years, it's forested again. But it's just not the case in our area. But you absolutely see that happen in the soil. And the less you disturb it, you'll see certain species that the seed bank is probably still there. The seeds are probably still in the soil, but they're not germinating because there's signals in the soil from the microbes that are living there that are telling them not to. Chemical messages say, don't germinate, you're going to germinate. And you can go in and till a big area that you hadn't seen a few species in for a while, and because you disturb it, then all of a sudden the wild tobacco and the mullein and the storksbill and what are some other really early successional, and cheatgrass comes up all the time no matter what, but those are three good examples. Those are really early succession. They start to phase out once you stop disturbing the soil, once that trend changes. So yeah, it's a great way to do it. Spread a big mix, particularly in the fall, and let it do its own thing. So I think
there's a company down in Liberty that will sell you a mix of native seed.
Yeah, Comstock seed. Yep, they're great. They have several different native mixes, and they'll do custom mixes based on your elevation too. Yeah, they're a great company. If anybody's looking for native seed, Comstock seed down in Douglas County, right on Highway 88 is awesome. That's a great recommendation. So we're also expanding some of our seed collection and production. So we've got a limited supply that we're now starting to work on. Working through the winter, we're going to be processing, labeling, germination testing, trying to step up our game on the seed a little bit. But I've got good quantities of some of the ones I mentioned, some of those wildflower seeds. So, I think that's all I got for today. So, and I don't think anybody tuned in. So I was talking at the screen, but there's nobody there. It'll be up there, so this might be comical, but so, yeah, I think that's all I got. So yeah, I'm gonna sign off here. Thanks if anybody checks this out, much appreciated.